message, and the only safety message, hopefully. The exits are over here and towards the back as well. The AED is all the way down in the hallway. God forbid that you don't have to use that. And that's pretty much it for my safety message. Make sure everyone knows where everything is. So that's pretty much about it for me. And then I'll have Poppy give up our opening remarks.
Can everybody hear me? It's hard to tell sometimes. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. My name is Bob G., and I am President for Asian Americans in Energy, the Environment, and Commerce. I know that's a mouthful. We go by the acronym AE2C, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. I see some old faces and some new faces. Thank you for being with us this afternoon as we celebrate Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I think I got all the names right. We are here to recognize our community's contributions to America and to celebrate the American experience. We have AE2C is a 501c3 founded 14 years ago. We have three principal missions for us. We provide opportunities for educational resources for our members to know about matters of timely importance. We also advance professional networking, and we also convene professional networking. We also advance professional development. This event fulfills the mission for us and provides the best example of all three. We could not do this without the work of all of you. And I want to take this time to thank three groups of folks who helped put this together. The first is the PEPCO Holdings Asian American Resource Group. Ann Bancroft, the executive sponsor, thank you so much. You just heard from, who is the president of the Asian American There are too many names in the Asian American Resource Group to recognize, but many of them are identified on the program that should have been provided to you.
The QR code.
All right, we'll have a QR code for you to access that. I also want to thank the members of AE2C. Again, there are several people that are on our program. Let me just sort of make a mental checklist. I don't forget to recognize everybody. Jenny Howe, James Hart, where are you, James?
Jane.
Oh, right there. Amethyst, I know you're here. Here you are. We'll hear from all later today. And then finally, as a vital member of our AE2C team, and one of our founding members, who is currently on the board of PEPCO Holdings, Ben Wu, thank you for being with us today. The third group that I would like to recognize, obviously, are our sponsors. And today we have one sponsor, which is PEPCO Holdings. You should know that PEPCO Holdings has been with AE2C since the very beginning. They've been a corporate sustaining, our longest and most loyal corporate sustaining sponsor for 14 years. And we want to thank PEPCO Holdings for staying with us through thick and thin and for helping to sponsor this event with us again today. And in that regard, I am pleased and honored to welcome for opening remarks the President and CEO of PEPCO Holdings, Tyler Anthony.
Tell you, for a small crowd, you're making a lot of noise. I think you covered the welcome of the different folks in the room today. You know, but one person I'd like to underscore a few. But before I start, you know, I was thinking about why we do this and why are we together here today. Like just to step back and think about. So if I ask the different tables for ideas about why we're here today, one thing you might say is to advance professional. I think that's has to deal with networking, has to deal with building relationships, and I always felt to move our industry forward, it has to have a foundation of trust. And then you'd ask, how do you establish a foundation of trust? And in my career, I've always felt there's three parts to establishing trust in an organization. One is you have to spend time together. We spend time together, we move from relationship into respect. Then after we respect each other and continue in that road, we move from respect to trust. And when you have trust in an organization, frankly, there's nothing that you cannot handle or do together. And when I heard your comments up here, it reminded me of the passion in which you talked about the organization. It feels like in that 14-year journey, you established an organization with a foundation of trust and professional growth. So thank you personally for all you've done to make this successful. Okay? They talked about Ann's a great sponsor for our Asian American Resource Group. But I got to know Dustin over the last several years, bumping into him out in the field as well as in storms. And you may not know this, but he's kind of famous. I don't know if you guys can see this up here. I was talking about that professional development. So this is the cover of the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineering. And if you notice, I have a signed copy. I have a signed copy. And I've been able to give you different awards over the years, Dustin. Thank you for what you do in this organization, because without that servitude leadership, we wouldn't be here, so thank you. Doesn't go unnoticed or unappreciated. Okay, so talking a little bit about the topic tonight. The topic tonight about what might the future power market look like. So I sat back and thought, these events give us a chance for the different reasons I mentioned, but also gives everyone a chance to kind of step out of your normal day-to-day, and it's kind of like a little bit of a forcing function to get the distractions of the day in your current roles, and think a little bit future, and a little bit like what could the future look like, and could that influence decisions I make about my personal career, or things that I spend my time working on. Now, I sat there and said, I'll ask you guys to ponder that question. What might the future of the power market look like? Let's take a 10-year view of that. I'll be interested, as you think about it at your tables, if there's anything you'd like to add, but I created a little list. I said, artificial intelligence. It's going to be in everything we do in the next 10 years. It's going to change the way we live, work, and play. It's going to obviously, and the power demands behind that you're all very familiar with. How about self-driving cars? I believe in the next 10 years we will not be driving cars. I don't know if you agree with it. I'm kind of like an old Chevelle kind of a guy myself, but I believe self-driving cars are going to be here. We're already seeing how that's manifesting itself. And then technology. I think AI is going to also influence rapid change. When we mention everything we do in the art of the possible of what that's going to look like, do you believe in the next 10 years, each of you will own a robot that will function to do, whether it's menial tasks or other tasks? You sit here and think about, will each of you guys in your family homes operate a robot? The technology's already there. It's just about mass production and the continuing development of technology. So I guess the headline is, my view in the next 10 years, electrification will continue to be one of the most important products to sustain life as the way we know it. And I've gotten in front of other groups, I often talk about, if I ask you the question, what's most important to sustaining life? You might say air. You might say water. And then I would say, well, where is electricity on that list? It may not be third, but you have to agree it's moving up. I think when we saw this most recent power outage over in Spain with 90 million people, when you think about the impacts of, I can't pump gas, I can't do commerce because the cards and the credit systems didn't work, I can't drive, I can't pump water. When you think about the product that we are all responsible for, it continues to move up on that importance ladder for life as the way we know it. Okay? Now, with that said, the challenges. There's some very, very bright people in the room today. And you're sitting here, maybe you're an engineer, or your background, maybe it's finance, etc. But let's take a brief minute and think about the landscape we have today. So I try to draw the future. Well, before I move off of that, does anybody have Another comment about what the next 10 years they think it could look like? What the next 10 years could look like? Anybody else? I'll give you $5,000 to come up with that. All right? But I'll move on, and what I'll say is this. Let's take a look at let's just take a look at the service territories that we support in the room from PEPCO Holdings, and what has happened here just in the last few years. Let's take nuclear power. In the last few years, it's gone from we want to do away with nuclear power to we were looking to build new nuclear power plants to we were getting away from nuclear power, and now we're back building small nuclear reactors. You guys know that journey. Pretty interesting. I bet we couldn't have forecasted that over the previous 10 years. But in the service territories we provide, I'm going to give you a couple of data points. In New Jersey, about 4 years ago, we took off the last fossil plants in the state. Logan and some other ones in New Jersey came offline. So the state of New Jersey no longer runs fossil plants. In December of last year, we took the last fossil plant off in Delaware to Indian River. Most recently in Maryland, they announced they're shutting down at Brandon Shores, one of the last fossil plants in Maryland. And then with the onset of AI and the importance of that, you know, when I get to go on the Hill and I've had a round of different senators and congressmen, there's a firm belief that from a national security standpoint, these data centers, we need them built in the United States and being onshore. And that has the challenges it has with demand and resources. And I'll give you guys an idea of that. For background, everyone in here is pretty familiar that a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts, is about the size of a large nuclear unit. In our utility in Chicago and Illinois, they have 36 gigawatts of committed data center production and building going on right as we speak. The peak, ComEd's peak power until these data centers are being built is about 24 gig. So think about, they essentially have added another state and a quarter here in the past several months. In our service territory, we have either commitment or construction going on at about 8.5 gig. So when you think of these power plants, and I see my friends over here from Quanta, you guys are going to be busy building all that stuff, okay? So I'm just trying to lay that out, that the data centers come on, the fossils coming off, and then when you find with the need of transmission in our country, some of these lines are taking 6 and 7 years just to get approval to build. So when you think about the future I just kind of drew for everybody, and you think about the challenges that are in front of us, we clearly have a lot of work to do. And I'll close on just a few more things, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. You know, the piece on the grid itself, the resiliency of the grid. Exelon, across our 6 operating companies, right now we're spending each of the next 5 years on average $1.2 billion on information technology systems across the Exelon family of companies. It's the single largest investment we're making of our entire portfolio is in different advanced IT systems, how we can integrate the renewables, et cetera, but that's what we're spending. And then when you think about the grid, let me give you a data point. Everybody here is on the national news about these significant weather events due to climate change. I'll give you a statistic. In 2024, weather events that have caused a greater than $1 billion in damage in 2024 was actually 24. So we had 24 events in the United States last year that caused greater than $1 billion worth of damage. In the mid-1980s, if you equated for inflation, how do you think we were averaging in the mid-1980s? 3.5. So whether you're sitting here and you're pro climate change, you don't believe in climate change, I think you could agree with me something's going on. So now when you think of that dependence on the grid, you think about the weather, you think about the demands, and you think about the challenges, this industry is going to change significantly in the next 10 years, and I really appreciate the topic that you guys came up with today. So I'll close with this. When it comes to affordability, what we're doing at PEPCO Holdings is the conversations that I have and what has happened due to the power price demands for the reasons I covered today. You know, we have situations, for example, this summer, come June, based on the last purchase of supply, we're gonna see on average the bills of our customers going up 20%. That's in one specific auction due to the increase in power demands. So affordability now, of all the items I mentioned, affordability is becoming a major conversation. I guess you guys follow the periodicals, every state, you're hearing about it everywhere. But we're really looking at affordability as the top item of risk for our customers, and there's really 4 areas that we're approaching that on. One has to do with PJM and reforms to the different utilities. Even though we don't control and own generation anymore, but our voice in PJM and market reforms and how we influence, how we take different dispatchable resources, how they're considered, what does the different venues look like for how power pricing is established, we're trying to play hard in the supply side. There's even conversations in 2 of our states where they're looking to have utilities build regulated generation again. So we have a group under Queen Kuzami is actually saying to ourselves, if we get asked to build generation, are we ready? So we actually have a big investment we're making on being prepared, proactive contracts, and what does that look like if we're asked to go build power plants, which it feels inevitable, okay? Then the second one has to deal with the customer. I don't know how many, I guess, there's a lot of people in here, PEPCO customers, what about PEPCO customers in the room? Okay. Now you guys are you guys, it's just a check, are you getting your email every week or 2 that shows your usage by day, how much you're spending? Are you guys getting all that? So we're trying to give customers more information about their energy usage so they can take a little bit of control of that. So we have quite a bit of things that we're trying to do where customers, you know, I'll say 3 years ago, your electric bill was somewhere buried below phone, cable, it was somewhere in the middle. Now your electric bill is kind of getting up there just under mortgage. So people are paying more attention. As an example, in our 3 utilities, we now have 130,000 residential customers with rooftop solar, and it's booming. We're averaging 13,000 applications a year right now for solar because customers are looking at what can they do to lower their energy costs. Okay, so customer. Then the last 2, and I'll close, is utility costs. You know, this is about how we need the engineers in the room, we need whether your lawyers in the room, how can we continue to lower our costs of doing service? Where are we doing our part to lower those costs? And then last has to deal with legislation. You know, I get involved a little bit, you know, with these the federal layoffs that are occurring. Our areas are getting hit significantly. Prince George's County, I believe, may be the largest impacted so far in the U.S. And my time on the Hill, I'm finding that this is going to continue, more likely continue than not. And when you think about legislation, in fact, I heard that this current budget proposal, I don't know if I have the latest but I believe that LIHEAP, what we give to customers for low income, I'm hearing that has the risk of being cut significantly as well. So there's just quite a bit of pressure on our customers. So I'll close with affordability, something where we're going to need everybody's help on how we manage it, whether it's the PJM, whether it's the customer, whether it's what we control our own costs, or what we're doing legislatively. Okay, so with that, thank you guys.
Thank you for getting us started on laying the groundwork for our next panel. And at this time, I want to introduce the moderator for our next panel, who will introduce the panel and lead the discussion. And her bio is also will be in your packet. She's somebody who also has done everything, but currently I'm pleased to share that she is our Vice President for AE2C, and I want to thank her personally for doing this. Jeanette Pavlov. Jeanette? I think I'll just have to share.
And co-founder.
Yes, and founding members.
Join us. Thank you very much for your comments. They were so right on, and we're all thinking about it. So I couldn't have said it better, and I really appreciate your sharing that information with us. Okay, so I think this is a nice kind of crowd where most of us know one another, but And our bios are all on the QR code. So we're going to jump into the meat after just a very brief introduction. So Alex Bond, a longtime friend, is the Executive Director of Clean Energy and Environment at the Edison Electric Institute. Jane Park, another good friend, is the Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer at Summit Utilities, I think for 2 or 3 months?
2 months.
Okay, great. And Will, it's nice to see you again. Will Sauer is Vice President of Federal Regulatory Affairs at Exelon. So we're going to start right into our first question. Both the new administration and the previous administration focus on energy, but their approaches are, shall we say, quite different. Alex, why don't you start with just a level set on how Edison Electric Institute and its member companies are responding to these policies?
Absolutely. We can share. So yeah, thank you, Jeanette, and thank you for having us here today. Really happy to be here to do this. I am unlucky or lucky enough to be the person that all of the executive order responses run through at EEI. I tend to lean towards unlucky given the pace of how it has been coming at us, and we'll have more tomorrow, so even more exciting for everybody involved. So what we have been doing in terms of how the industry is responding is really trying to take a level head, and that means a couple of different things for us. One is really focusing on triage, right? There's stuff that comes out seemingly every day. In the early stage processes of the administration itself, it seemed like there was a 9 a.m. one, there was a 10 a.m. one, there was a noon one, and then there was a press conference, and then there were more at 6 o'clock, right? So it was overwhelming, and you couldn't respond to everything, which might have been the point now that I think about it. But as we went through it, it was really trying to focus on what matters, right? In terms of the different types of EOs, you put them in some buckets. And what we really tried to focus on was like, okay, what are press releases? A lot of these are just press releases. What actually doesn't have any impact on us, even if it was real, put those to the side over there. And then really focusing on that last bucket of things, which is, okay, an executive order, as you know, we know, doesn't really hold, in a lot of cases, doesn't really actually do anything, right? It's a direction for other people to maybe think about going and doing something later, right? Really focusing on those things and being like, okay, which of these do have teeth? Which of them are relevant to us? Which of them might actually end up becoming something down the line? And focusing on, okay, if an executive order is a direction to go do something, it at least gives us a sense of where they're going and what are the parameters of that debate and what are the parameters of the future action and what does that mean for us in terms of how we have to respond. So from the EEI perspective, that has taken a couple of different ways, right? It's, okay, we've determined it impacts us. How does it impact us, or how could it impact us? Let's run that analysis. Let's figure out what the art of the possible is here. Because oftentimes what we find is the underlying statutes, the underlying requirements, the underlying stuff that is actually going to happen, and the rhetoric doesn't match. I know you're as shocked as I am. But what we're really trying to do and focus on there is like, okay, what's the actual thing that's going to happen, and how do we prepare for that? What's the analysis that we can give to membership? How do we position ourselves correctly to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the entire sector? For us, that really means a focus on implementation, right? Executive orders get all the top billing. They should. When the president speaks, it usually makes news. But the afterwards, the what actually happens, the hard work, the regulations, the stakeholder process, the actually changing the underlying rules of the road is really difficult, and it takes a long time. And that implementation side is where we position ourselves as an industry to really make a difference, right? We do a lot in that space. We've had a robust regulatory practice for decades now. I'm looking at David Owens for decades now as EEI. I think one of the things that we really focus on is how are we going to respond and how are we going to put ourselves into the mix. For us, what that means is making sure that we're really focused on, consensus as a process, which means focusing and having a bunch of conversations across the industry with Exelon and PEPCO, and then every other partner that we have sort of across our membership to be like, okay, we might not be unanimous on the response or the excitement level or the non-excitement level with whatever the issue is, but do we have a consensus position where everyone can agree that this is where the industry needs to be, providing that umbrella coverage, right? Let's find consensus first. Second, let's be deliberate, but let's be responsive, right? There's no need to be immediately firing from the hip as an industry. but also we don't have to wait so long that we've missed the mark, right? And so trying to find that balance has been super important. And then finally, really focusing on moving forward as an industry and finding that sort of like solutions-oriented, fact-based approach to stuff. One of the things that we have found is oftentimes when you're dealing with our system and with the work that you all do, there's a lot of thought and conjecture. There's not a lot of this is how it actually works and happens, and that's the space where you can actually go in and change minds and approaches. So how do we focus on doing that in a way that is consistent with the overall mission, which is affordability, reliability, and increasing linking across our system, right? All those three things matter. We have an obligation to do those and serve the customer. I say we, I mean you all. But really trying to find a way to do that in a way that is consistent with being deliberate, being responsive, and making sure that we're doing that on a consensus basis. That's how the industry responds. If I have to come up with a really horrible analogy, it's a lot like running the football, right? You're like, we're just gonna go out there, we're gonna do 3 yards at a time, and it's going to work eventually, right? That's how we've operated. That's how the industry has been successful for the better part of a century and beyond. And I think it's how the industry is successful on an advocacy basis for the next century too. But I want to turn it over to Bill next. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. And to provide a little perspective on Exelon, really, how has Exelon been impacted by broader policy implications and action? And really how we're positioned as well. I think one thing Alex said I really liked, which is the perspective that an executive order is really just a first step in a series that directs kind of further action. That's largely how we've been looking at it. I've worked for an administration in the past. I've written executive orders. They're easy paper to write, they're easy paper to get out, and they should be viewed as that. So there's a whole bucket of watch areas that I'll touch on in a second. And that's where a lot of this is there's the direction to change things, and they're all in watch areas. The two items that I will highlight that are kind of immediate impacts and that have changed industry and that have impacted people are really two different things. One is offshore wind, and you've seen this early on where you've had the president directed really the permitting apparatus, so it'd be a Department of Interior or NOAA, all of these agencies that are responsible for permitting offshore wind to really stop what they're doing. And that has put a lot of kind of long-lived plans, particularly along the eastern seaboard, into kind of a scramble. You've seen this in New York, you've seen this in Virginia, you've seen this in Maryland, and even further south. And that change, and especially given the length that it takes to plan generation investments, the length of capital or the size of capital investment in really developing a new industry with offshore wind cannot be underestimated. So that's one of the early changes that I would say is substantial and is being felt now. Certainly, everybody's seen the news with Empire Wind. Is it on? Is it off? Is it being developed? Certainly, it is the latest news is that they're continuing construction and they've been given the green light. But we'll continue to watch that, obviously. And the other impact is something that Tyler pointed to, which is really the people. I've worked with the federal government before, and Alex has as well, and everybody here knows a number of very good government employees who are professional about their jobs. It's tough on a personal level to see a lot of these friends and former colleagues being let go, and Tyler pointed to the LIHEAP office. There's big questions about staffing in the LIHEAP office and the impact on how that impacts our customers and frequent customers across the country. So those are the two areas where I'd say that this is immediate impacts that we're seeing in tracking and engaging on. There's a bigger area of watch list items, which gets to the executive orders that Alex was touching on, and be it even what's going on the Hill now with reconciliation, so broader tax policy for investment tax credits, PTCs. These have drastic implications in the affordability of different types of technologies and will change business decisions considerably depending on what happens with tax policy. Same thing with transferability. I can't underestimate, or I can't understate enough as well. A lot of tax policy has direct impacts to the customer as well. So if you're looking at, we're closely tracking Is there going to be a corporate SALT requirement? Is there a kind of minimum corporate tax? What are some of the deduction elements? All these impact corporate, they always impact customer bills and affordability. So there's a lot of important conversation happening on the Hill that impacts both kind of which resources from a generation perspective are to be developed, as well as customer bills. So we are closely tracking, closely engaging all those items. The other two things I'd point out is just the makeup of federal agencies. Right now, we're waiting on announcements for the makeup of FERC commissioners. We're waiting for the announcements of NRC commissioners, and even frankly how independent agencies run. There's an executive order a couple months ago which directed changes in how independent agencies put rulemakings forward. And the result is we haven't seen a rulemaking for the last 2 months since that executive order is issued. So there's kind of questions of how those agencies are going to do their business and what level of review the rest of the administration has. So lots to track, including I think we could spend all day talking about executive orders, but including kind of emergency actions on that DOE may take for keeping existing resources around. But I'll pause the rest of the executive order discussion for questions, perhaps.
Thank you, Will. I'd like to begin by disclosing that I am in fact Jane Park's robot, driven here by a self-driving car. The remarks stated hereafter will be generated by AI. So Tyler and I go way back, and I have a Tyler story because I love how you started with the why. When I was very young and starting out at ComEd, Tyler said, Jane, let's do a one-on-one for career development. So I met him during his ordinary office hours, i.e. I met him at a Denny's in the far suburbs at 5 a.m. I'll never forget it. And one of the most important pieces of advice that Tyler told me that I share and pay forward, Tyler, is you cannot say the why too much. Always say it, always start with it. And I appreciated that you practice what you preach all these many years later. But thankfully, you and I have been untouched by age, so that's totally fine. Before I launch into my more substantive remarks, I do want to say it means so much to me to be here in this gallery and to see so many members of Exelon's AARG and AE2C supporters and allies, and just allies through the industry. It's wonderful to see you. And I know you're here for federal policy. I mean, my gosh, you'd have to fight you off with a stick. I know. If you know federal policy, you'll just want to hear it forever. But to know that you're also here to support AAPI Month is a tremendous thing. So I have been with Exelon for some number of years before I went to Summit, and I will tell you, it's interesting for somebody who's been in the electric industry for so long, looking and thinking about the electron and decarbonization of the electron. I had actually started thinking about decarbonization of the molecule quite a bit over the course of the last year, and it's because I read a really interesting thing that sort of changed my thinking on this. There was a report by JP Morgan that basically said, like, globally, $9 trillion. By the way, that's the annual GDP of 2 Germanys. I'd have to look that up. $9 trillion has been spent since 2010, invested in renewables. And yet the percentage of renewables that are meeting the increasing energy need is only increasing at 0.3 to 0.6%. That is very interesting, I thought. Not because it says anything about renewables. We need to increase that pace. It's valuable, it's important. But I wondered to myself, other solutions have to be out there. And it made me wonder about decarbonization of the molecule, and essentially, what do you do when you try to clean up gases and clean up fuels, and then how do you create fuels like renewable natural gas in a way that has, over its life cycle, lesser emissions. So that is a little bit of my path to Summit Utilities. We are natural gas, and we also have a renewable subsidiary that focuses on renewable natural gas. By the way, when I first went to Summit, I asked, because they formulate their renewable natural gas through digesters. They said to me, Jane, we know exactly what you're thinking. I'm like, what do you think I'm thinking? They're like, we do use a lot of poop emojis in our business. Okay, you guys do know exactly what I'm thinking. So that was absolutely true. But I know we're going to have a clean energy question in a minute, so I'll talk more about the renewable, how we're dealing with clean energy in this new environment. But in terms of the federal policies, I mean, you've heard from these folks, expert upon experts, about the changing, tariffs situation and the trade policy and the executive orders. What I would say for, a natural gas distribution company that's in 6 states, not a huge federal presence, so that also accounts for my calm and relative, good humor right now. I don't have to be in Washington, D.C. all the time. Is obviously, like Exelon, like many of the EI companies, the impacts that we see and that we're trying to manage right away are infrastructure costs, right? Especially as you see the tariffs hit, and supply chain. And you'll find for a lot of natural gas companies, particularly for us, a tremendous amount of what we have in our pipeline right now is domestically sourced. So that insulates us to some extent from the price fluctuations with the trade policy and the tariffs, but it also creates supply chain distortions internally. And you'll also read, and we feel it the same, like with these federal policies, natural gas has had a little bit of tailwinds, to put it mildly, right, under the current federal policy regime. And we have seen increased demand for natural gas. That's partly because this administration has lifted the ban on LNG exports, partly because you have so many companies needing this for generation and to look at gas generation. But beyond the things the impacts that companies are navigating that I know we've heard about, before I hand it over to Jeanette for our next question, I just wanted to say what we're also thinking about as we navigate what's happening on the federal policy side are things we don't have the answer to because, we're all dealing with the immediate price impact, but there's going to be future impact. So for instance, you referenced the jobs cuts. Well, whether you're in the gas or the electric sector, cuts to areas, what we're trying to ask ourselves is what data have we typically relied on from the federal government that is not really going to be there in the same way, and what do we do? So NOAA, other support services like FEMA. So these are impacts that are not like the ones you immediately read about in the news, but now that many utilities are thinking, okay, we've gotten them relatively insulated and planned for the pricing impacts in the near term. What are the data impacts? I would also say another question that we're asking ourselves is you gradually see a little bit of a lessening of the federal regulatory regime right now, lower requirements. And that can be good and bad because I think if we were here 2 years ago, we would have said that some of the regulations made it almost prohibitive for us to be able to build the infrastructure on a timely basis that we needed. But now we're asking ourselves, what will that look like in a year or two or more when you find more fragmentation of regulation now? There is some benefit to having a federal regulation, some standard that reduces transaction costs. As we face a future where there are much more fragmented standards, state-based standards that we're going to have to comply with without the guidance of the federal standard, what does that mean for our business? So these are just a couple of additional second layer impacts that we're trying to think through in addition to the complexity that you've heard from the others. So that answer was found on perplexity. No, I'm joking. I actually want to read that by myself. I'm going to hand this back to Jeanette that way.
I'm going to take the microphone prerogative as well.
Thank you.
I loved the part of your answer where your first meal with Tyler was with the hamburger. And this is...
They don't serve hamburgers at 5 a.m. Hotcakes.
My first meal as well, unfortunately yours did not have a hamburger, thought that my first meal with Tyler was with a hamburger as well. So maybe 10 years from now they have healthy hamburgers, and that's the 10-year vision.
Only take it to the best places.
I would say you've upgraded taste from Denny's, but that may not.
Okay, all right, so our next question, and thank you, Jane, for keeping it up. EEI and its members, Exelon and Summit Utilities, have significant commitments to addressing climate change. How are your companies navigating these policy shifts? And you want to go first? You look pretty
Thank you for the easy question. So I think one of the things that we are focused on is there's a little bit of a mismatch between what we've been talking about here in terms of federal policy and a lot of the timing horizons that companies think about. That has both good and bad outcomes. By that I mean administrations come and go. Executive orders can be done and dusted, like Will said, in a couple of hours. Regulations take years to actually promulgate and get through a process and then implement. And companies, especially when you talk about long-lived assets and resources like the grid and like power plants and productions, think in terms of decades. Those mismatches are interesting, and they create a bunch of different sort of impacts and ripples across the space that we operate in. And so what I see across the universe of EEI companies is, perhaps in the previous administration we would say clean, affordable, reliable. Now people say reliable, affordable, and clean. But they're the same words, they're just in a different emphasis, a different tone, and a different order. But ultimately what we're seeing across the space is a lot of the business decisions that companies making are really similar in general in terms of resource mix and resource decisions. But what we're also seeing is companies have climate commitments, maybe retirement of a unit, a fossil unit, in 2028 becomes 2030, right? Maybe because of supply chain impacts that Jane was mentioning earlier, something that's replacement level power from 2027 becomes 2029, right? And those are things that will have impacts that will change the emissions profile of the fleet, of the grid, and of the country. But at the end of the day, the overall push has been, okay, what's available, where can we go now? And I think that the most interesting thing in terms of navigating climate shifts, both politically and then also from a policy perspective too, has been demand. And the significant increase for demand has been the thing that has actually moved the needle in terms of overall climate change commitments and where companies are going. But it hasn't always been universally in one direction. It's a more nuanced picture than I think either the previous administration or this administration has actually wanted to admit. And by that, I really mean a lot of the folks that are building those data centers in that load want it to be clean, right? And like there's a demand for clean energy to meet new data center requirements. There's also a demand that everything be done yesterday and at scale, which is a whole separate set of issues. But I do think that new demand is driving a desire for just more power across the board. What we see when we look at, and Will and I were talking offline a little bit earlier about interconnection issues, we will not dive into that here, I promise. But when we look at sort of like what we're seeing in terms of the queue across the industry wide, there's a ton of solar and storage that was in the queue 4 months ago. What's in the queue today is a ton of solar and storage, and also more gas, right? But like the significant need, the difference there is instead of dealing with just 100 parts of demand 4 months ago, maybe it's at 120, and we filled some of that backfill with more solar and storage and more gas as well, right? And so what we're seeing in terms of what that does for climate visions is the best thing our companies can do from an emissions perspective and environment perspective is still retire an aging fossil asset and replace it. What do we tend to replace it with is a mix of different projects, really focusing on not necessarily just the resource itself in terms of what fuel we're using, but what attributes to bring to the system, right? Is it dispatchable? Is it new nuclear? Is it something that we can actually, do we need dispatchable power here, or do we need to be able to hook up different types of resources across different parts of the grid? So to that end, what I see in terms of the climate change commitments across the industry is they're still there. They're changing. I think they're sliding backwards in a couple of instances, and other instances they're sliding forward. And that's because I think looking across the country, people have decided to retire aging assets almost regardless of the decisions of an administration. I think under Biden, what you're seeing is they were trying to find ways to accelerate those decisions, and people were resistant to accelerating retirement decisions for mostly economic and practical reasons. And what you're seeing today with this administration is a desire to extend those resources even further out at a time, and you're seeing resistance for economic and practical reasons, right? And so I think what we're really focused on is seeing companies try to execute their plans and their vision and trying to do that in a way that continues their commitments. No one ever thinks it's linear. Progress is rarely linear. Progress often is incremental. But what we see across the board is that incremental progress is going to continue. But going back to what I said earlier, that's kind of what this industry is great at doing. And so I think we're moving forward. It's not fast enough for some, and it's too fast for others. That's what I would call just a day that ends in Y.
Thank you, Alex. Similarly, first of all, welcome to the PEPCO building. We're in a kind of this important year as Exelon, as a holding company of PEPCO and a number of other utilities. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, and it's an important milestone. But I think at 25 years in context, it's much bigger when you look at the OPCO history and the history of all of our companies together. And I've heard the number, I'm not sure I can quite verify it, but I've heard the number that combined, it's over 400 years across our operating companies. I say I can't verify it, I'm sure it's right. I just don't ask me what the math is. Someone in this room might be able to know. I bring that up for a couple different reasons. Mainly, how do we get here? How do we get to the point where we're celebrating combined 400-year history, which to me is quite impressive. And that is we've kept our core values. We've taken a long-term approach to making decision making, and I think that's what you're seeing now still as from our company. You're hearing our leaders say that our core values haven't changed, even though even though the policy landscape is changing, and we are committed to those core values still. So I would similar to what Alex is saying, I would point to that as really where the company is. And we as a company, we still recognize that there is a close relationship between our industry specifically and climate change. So we are committed, as we have been since 2014, when we issued our first climate policy to meaningfully address climate change. And part of how we're doing that is continuing to look inward. How can we as a company make meaningful improvements, reduce our own emissions? And we continue to have a goal of 2030 to reduce our operating emissions by half. And part of that's by modernizing our gas infrastructure to improve leaks, addressing leaks associated with other gases, greenhouse gases, including SF6, which is an important insulator. And part of this is looking at other gases as well, like hydrogen, as an insulator potentially. Electrifying our own fleet. And it's all of these ways that we can improve our own operations as well. So we're looking towards 2050, and we're reducing our emissions to be net zero by 2050. Continue to stand strong with that. In addition to looking internally, we always look at ways of how can we enable our own customers to take meaningful steps this way. So demand responsible will continue to play a role, enabling electrification, supporting distributed solar, either at a residential level or community solar level. So we are continuing to kind of enable transitions as well for our customers. Again, we're committed. That hasn't changed in our 25-year history as Exelon, and certainly our combined even longer history. And we'll continue to take a long view, and most importantly, stand by our core values.
Thank you, Will. Listening to that, it brings me back. It's really wonderful to hear, and I'm even as an Exelon alum, I'm extremely proud of Exelon to hear that. So thank you for sharing that. I mean that. Well, I want to talk about something slightly different, right? So for Summit, we have this interesting situation where we're in a couple states like Colorado and Maine that have very aggressive climate goals, but then we're also in 4 states that I will say diplomatically really strongly believe in all of the above energy policy. There are states like Texas or Missouri or Oklahoma or Arkansas, so they just don't sit in the same space with their climate goals. But at the same time, we have this renewable subsidiary that is very focused on renewable natural gas. And I'll just spend 1 minute to say, like, in case, because I know so many folks in this room are electricity based, and I would say I probably didn't know this 2 years ago either, right? I mean, renewable natural gas is basically what they call the biogas. It takes waste, and the methane, if you left that waste just sitting out there, the methane that would just organically come from that is actually like 28 times worse in carbon intensity than if you actually flared it or burned it off. So rather than letting that happen, you take the waste, you put it in a digester, you create methane gas, you purify it and upgrade it so that it's pipeline quality, and then you inject it into the pipeline. The reason why it's so interesting is because it creates sort of an integrated solution across multiple environmental issues. Not only are you essentially creating something that could have, potential net carbon intensity, but you're also doing something where you're taking care of waste. In America, 1 billion tons of livestock waste is generated every year. That just kind of goes into runoff and other pollutants. It's not an ideal situation. And then the third part of it is you're able to find these solutions in rural America, where you basically help places bring jobs, create new industry in rural places and in agricultural sectors. And the reason I'm laying it all out like that is because that storyline, that going out and doing something that is not only good for the environment, but, oh, you're bringing in, tackling another problem these communities have because they have waste, whether it's landfill waste, lots of different ways you can make RNG, and you're helping bring jobs in a different kind of industry to agriculture in rural America, is a story that has meant that RNG has actually found a very receptive audience here, and back in the state houses. And I would say generally perceived to have some policy tailwinds behind it. So, for example, in the reconciliation bill that is on everybody's mind right now, of the many provisions of the IRA tax credits that got it, one that remains is actually 45Z on clean fuels. And what you saw come out of committee was the extension of that credit, which would have normally expired in 2027, has now, for now, everything could change, been extended 4 years. And that credit covers livestock, manure, poultry, litter, that type of stuff, that type of feedstock. And frankly, now that I get a chance to work with a lot of developers and see how our folks like to have the deals pencil, those credits are critical to having the deals pencil. And that's why it's important to have that in the reconciliation bill right now. There are other aspects like the transferability of that attribute that is not in there right now. Those are things, debates that will continue to happen. Who knows what will happen in the Senate. But I use that as an example because when you say that, what I think is happening is the commitment is still there. The companies are still working on it. We're thinking differently and more broadly about different sectors to combine, different allies to come with us, different ways to message it. And I do think there are success stories where it's resonating.
Okay, so we have a third question, which has a lot of long answers, but I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask you to take the long question and short answer. Okay, 50? Okay, all right. All right, so you'll recognize this issue. Electricity demand is projected to reach 15% over the next 5 years, compared to an average of 1% over the past 10 years, due now to data centers, about 60%, onshoring manufacturing, 20%, and non-transportation related electrification, another 20%. How are you thinking about meeting the demand that's projected by grid strategy, so I have to give them credit, and facing also the challenges of retiring generation, et cetera?
Do you want to go first or do you go first? All right, carefully.
I'm going to pass in the interest of time.
No, it's a good question. I'll be brief, but not that brief. I will say, I think the thing that we are focused on is sort of the complex nature of the timing of all of these issues, which is to say, going back to the conversation we were just having, policy has an impact, but ultimately for us, we have a complex problem of time and space that we're trying to solve with retirement units, which is units that are retiring today stopped operation and maintenance years ago, right? And that was in preparation for replacement power coming in either at a different site or at the same site to take advantage of the existing transmission asset. Those are complex, time-sensitive processes in terms of getting the supply chain right, getting the timing correct, making sure the outages are done appropriately, making sure the entire regulatory apparatus supports it and is aware of when things are going to happen. That is a complex problem. It's a problem we can solve, but it's a problem that we need to be left to solve. And that to me is sort of how we think about it, is how do we find a way to do that in a way that maintains that reliability that's so essential, but also does it in a way that's affordable to the customer. And that is something in which making sure that we can do all the timing elements when they need to happen with a little bit of flexibility when things happen to change or go awry. that's how I think the industry thinks about it, and that's where I think we see policymakers not quite grasping the layers of that complexity, in which everything seems to be a simple answer because it's easy to grab a simple answer for a headline, but the reality is much more complex.
And Alex covered a lot of it, so I'll just keep it super short here. I started at Exelon 8 months ago, and I knew data centers would be a large part of the job when I started the company, but I definitely didn't appreciate how much of the job it would be. And even something that I'm sure a number of people in this room know of, which is co-location. I didn't appreciate how much my job in co-location would be, and it quickly swamped much of my calendar every day, and a lot of the focus is how do we bring data centers online quickly, but also do it in a way that's affordable for our customers and not having this big impact on customer bills and shifting costs from big data centers to customers. So there's, as Alex pointed, there's liability questions, there's sustainability questions, there's affordability questions, and they're all important to tackle and answer and address in this broader question. So short answer.
Okay. Does anybody know about the lead time for the gas turbines?
Long. I'm sorry. The queue for gas turbines is about 5 years. It's very difficult to get the queue to get a new gas turbine until about 2030. So if we're thinking about people who want policy answers now, and 5 years till something off the shelf that you can actually get to, that lead time is significant. And I'm not sure that anyone necessarily grasps what that functionally means. It doesn't mean you can't get anything until then. It just means that other people got in line first. And one thing I found about policymakers is they don't like the concept of being last in the line.
Okay, great. So how about some questions from the audience?
Please identify yourself too.
Okay, my name is Kehan Odion. I'm Senior Manager of Construction Maintenance Operations at PEPCO. So mainly my question is for you, is that you talked about all these renewable energies and clean energies that we spent billions and billions of dollars so far, and minimum capacity expanded, right? Comparing to all these data centers going up, right, and then putting it next to affordability, we spend so much, you're trying to gain more. We didn't talk so much about how we're focusing more on decarbonization or reducing, maybe going with the nuclear and the fossil energy. It's more affordable, easier to generate power. How we can make it more environmental friendly, and how much we're investing on that comparing to the energy.
I have a question for Will. We missed the name, sure.
Yeah, I would go with you. Sorry, I forgot the name.
To Jay.
Yeah, Jay.
Okay.
Nice stuff.
Well, I guess what I would say is it's absolutely critical, and in many ways I think this question is better suited to Will, and I'm not just saying that to say that, because what you're talking, first of all, I never meant that stat to be negative. The 1 trillion was a trillion, not billion, it was 9 trillion. Because what it really meant to say is, let's be more expansive about the technologies we should be investing in. Carbon capture and storage right now is hot, and you see a lot of people investing in it, and that's great, and they should. Someone told me, who's a board member on another utility, people underestimate the amount of innovation that folks at oil companies are actually doing on these topics. I don't know, you can believe it or disbelieve it depending on your bent here in the crowd. So, that has to happen. I think there is a tremendous focus on making sure that the data center node happens in a clean way on the generation side. So you'll see, for example, nuclear and the renaissance of nuclear. It's a little unclear where small modular reactors are going to go. It was really hot topic a couple of years ago, a little bit softer topic now. I think you find like the Constellation Calpine merger, right? You see people trying to move toward more at least natural gas fired generation to power the electric load for the data centers. versus what you'll see in some other states trying to restart coal plants. So, you know, I think there is an effort on it. We don't generate beyond like, you know, small amounts, and renewable natural gas, despite my pitch, is not ever going to scale to hit that data center at like, you know, 36 gigawatts, you know, that Tyler said for Chicago. By the way, the stat I always keep in my head to keep this straight, Tyler, is I think 1 gigawatt, I think, is what powers roughly Houston for a year, all the homes in Houston. So that's a tremendous amount of load. I don't know, Will, if you like to speak out.
I'll add to it a little bit. I mean, it's. I think we're at a moment where we are waiting for the technology on clean generation sources that are dispatchable to truly catch up to the need of the moment for demand that we're seeing. And I've seen, if you look at the existing technologies, there's not much. I mean, you can look at hydroelectric power and basically hydroelectric storage, as well as nuclear in terms of, there's questions about whether nuclear is dispatchable, and we could debate that all day. But there's not a lot of truly zero emission dispatchable technology that's available yet. There's a lot of work in developing those technologies, which are more 2030 timeframe. I think if you look at, obviously Exelon is not, and our operating companies, as you know, are not an electric generation business. But if you look around the company, or if you look around the country, there's a lot of, say, new nuclear and IRPs. There's a lot of new gas and IRPs, and that's what a lot of the investments that data centers are frankly driving based on their working with generation companies, working with kind of vertically integrated utilities. And that's largely the technology that's being selected to meet the need based on what is available now. So it's, I hope you're going to see more nuclear. Yeah, I look for the day when you do have more kind of zero emission dispatchable technologies. But right now, what you're seeing is kind of reliance on gas, a hope for nuclear, and plans for nuclear.
I'm just going to say a couple of words here. When we're talking about advanced technologies for the electricity sector, if you can't really, there's actually a huge overlap between clean electricity generation and advanced electricity generation, right? At the same time, when we're looking at these advanced technologies, we're actually in many cases looking at the pilot phase, or even before the pilot phase. There's a huge gap in time between the pilot phase and commercialization. Not just the first plant that goes commercial, but how many can you go for? How long does it take to get to 10, 15? Because that's what's going to be needed with these demand requirements. If you talk to TVA, they are pretty forward in the nuclear space, as always they have been. They're looking at 2045 for starting to get the nuclears up in the commercial level. That is a long way away, but it's probably more realistic. So what I would say is that if you really want to address climate change and affordability and reliability, we have to be really conscientious about scrupulously looking at what are the facts behind achieving these range of technologies, and how are we going to compensate for the time that we need it to be to the time that it will happen. Any other, okay, Jenny? Unless you're saying you're cutting the line off, is that
I have a question. Jimmy Hao, my background is in market design, so there are a lot of challenges actually for the utility side right now. If you go through PJM and you have to go through the capacity market, the data head, energy delivery, and then the actual real time, all kinds of complexities, then Constellation goes to the bilateral PPA directly with the technology company, bypass all of this complexity of the market rules and the changes, here and there. How does the utility like a PEPCO deal with this kind of unforeseeable type of electricity demand from behind the meter, from those technology companies, the data centers and others? That's my question. Thank you.
She was actually looking at Tyler when she was. Should I give it to him or let's give it to Will first?
Let me make sure I understood the question first. I mean, it's how do we deal with complexity with the PJM market? How do we deal with ever-evolving capacity market rules? How do we deal with, does that kind of get to your question a
How
little bit?
can you put the control of those IPPs that actually bypass all of the complexity of the market redesign?
Got it.
How can you put that under control?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating question. I don't know if I have a great answer for you right now. PJM has gone through a tremendous amount of change in the last couple of years. And you have the CEO who's leaving, you have board members who were voted down just 2 weeks ago with kind of long-serving board members. So we're obviously closely engaging with PJM. We are yeah. Sorry, I'm lost my thought. Tyler, do you have a?
I think you're being honest about, it's a great question, and it's a difficult question. I think you're asking the right balance of question that's why we're here tonight, is, I don't know what gets to your answer, but what do we know? And Will said earlier about sticking to our values and long-term decision making. It kind of resonated with your question, because Exelon early on, when PP&L had their co-located data center and then sold that to a third party, they made every attempt to make that behind the meter sale. Exelon went somewhat, just being candid, against the grain, against the financial markets, took impacts to the stock and said, that doesn't go to our values. So we're going to go to PJM, we're gonna say we don't agree with that decision. FERC needs to make a ruling on how behind the meter will be managed. Will they be a part of the transmission grid and take services or not? So I think it kind of goes in line with what Will said in your question. So now your question going forward, I do believe that there will be a FERC decision on how those dispatchable resources are managed at that level. And I also think that the education that has occurred getting out of the federal piece and going into state and locals, we have done many forums at different state legislations, state legislative hearings and bodies to educate decision makers to the issue. And there's been overwhelming support that says we won't put these data centers in until we understand the full impact. We won't have that impact to customers. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of like where we are today. Now let's take your question one step deeper, because I think this is one that's also somewhat difficult. Let's just say today we have a feeder, a 12 kV feeder, distribution feeder, and let's say it feeds 1,000 homes. How do I predict when everyone will get their first EV? How do I predict when they'll get their second EV? How do I predict when the robot is going to come? And will this block go before that block? Where will my distribution system strains start to show up? We had 68 circuits in the state of New Jersey that we had so much solar penetration, we had to stop additional solar installations just because capacity. And the only way we knew is because we hit capacity. because we were just like, okay, how, we didn't know what customers were gonna go on what streets and what circuits. We couldn't predict who was gonna do what, because distribution system planning, some of the best people in the room here at that, before you could plan, you could see homes being built, and you had a good 3-year window, you knew when to build the substation. Going future, these technologies, we're gonna have new ways to understand how those technologies are gonna manifest themselves and where. Because today, we're in the distribution side, the only way we know is why did that breaker, why did that fuse blow on XYZ street? Let's go take a look. Now, what I've seen, which is promising, is I've seen even on the new meter technology, maybe you guys are familiar with it, where there's a technology that Itron has now where they're loading apps into the meter. Have you seen some of that? Which is going to help that predictor, and what does that look like? So I think it's a great question. I think it's kind of too loud.
No, very, very helpful.
One last question, you were right there.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, please identify yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Abdel Marwani Consulting. With all the unknowns and uncertainties that we are facing, do you see investors making decisions on building data centers, such as maybe having their own on-site generation, for instance? And how about demand-side management, dealing with maybe retailable load programs, and how the utilities is prepared for that?
I can take it. Thank you so much for the question. I mean, you ask a tremendous question in the sense that the biggest driver of load growth right now is data centers. And there's a fantastic report from the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Committee last year. So these are kind of CEOs across the country and academics who advise the Secretary of Energy. And they found in the report that if you look at is demand of a data center, is it grid aware? Is it flexible to when you have emergencies on the grid? And they clearly said, well, that capability is there, but if you're looking at all the data centers across the country, there's no examples of an actual data center that is grid aware and ramping down and actually integrating with the grid to be a resource during times of stress. So it's clearly an area, if you look at demand response programs, if you look at, well, can the data center switch offline and essentially use for backup generation at a time of system stress? There's clearly ample opportunities to make improvements and to use that as a resource as we're trying to meet kind of the broader demand needs. That's absolutely conversations that our customer teams have with data centers as we're developing them. That's obviously conversations we're having on the Hill and with regulatory agencies as well. So it's very much an opportunity and one that I think we need to keep moving on to meet the broader resource advocacy.
As Will said that, I got to have a discussion with the head of Dell Energy. And you know how your computer has a power board? And like it says to you, hey, like you're down to 5% power, I'm gonna tone things down.
Dell's view was, in order to have these resources, back to the comment about time, is that we're gonna need to have data centers as an integrated part of the grid versus a standalone. I think that's what your question was. But Dell, as we speak, is trying to figure out how to integrate data centers as a part of the grid versus just a taker from the grid.
I was going to steal a story from one of my colleagues, Scott Aronson, which is 25 years ago. Military installations also thought that they wanted to build a lot of on-site power or become utilities. And then 5 years after that decision, they decided it's a lot better to let utilities be utilities. And I wonder where we are in this cycle there with our data center friends as well. So I think we can get there. I do think it's an opportunity, like Will noted, and like there's a path there. But at the end of the day, the work you guys do is hard. I don't know that they really want to have factored in everything that goes into that.
Okay, please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, for addressing the issues of the day in terms of energy policy. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our next moderator, an AE2C member, Amethyst Roebuck. She is the director at Quanta Services, which is another one of our corporate sponsors. She has a very long title, I won't repeat it, but she will introduce, she is the head of our Southern California chapter for AE2C. We've come all the way from California. She lost her bags along the way, but she's here with us right now. So I want to turn the microphone over to her to introduce and moderate our next panel. Amethyst?
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to introduce our panelists to come join me up here on stage. We have Taisha Davis with Exelon. She's the Director of Talent Management and Leadership Development. Jim Eganrider. Okay, he is Professor and Director at Virginia Tech. And Chloe Jackson, she is with PEI. She is Senior Director of Clean Energy Technology. So, and policy, I apologize for that. So today we're going to kind of build on what we talked about, policy and regulatory policy with clean energy transition and the grid, and talk about workforce development, which is a much more practical application for our folks out in the field to make sure that we have that necessary resources to build this infrastructure. And so we've got a couple questions. So the first question I'd like to ask is, Director DeHoy, how are the demands of the transition to renewable energy affecting our current skilled craft labor in Iraq?
Okay, the first thing I want to thank my friend Jenny. She encouraged me to join this panel. So I want to say the transition is not now. It actually started 20 years ago. So when I started my PhD program in 2011, that's the time National Science Foundation built two PhD programs. One in Iowa is called Wind Energy Science, Engineering, and Policy. And one in Maine focused on offshore. And everybody feels like, what the heck you're building? You know, you're supposed to focus on like industrial or electrical or mechanical, right? You want to do everything. You want to be a meteorologist, you want to be mechanical, electrical, right? And policy. And then, but I hear the word National Science Foundation, and it's something calling from DC. Then you just all in. So I got in, and the second year, and got a call from Exelon before they divorced with Constellation. So I joined them, and they said, okay, we'll just keep you for the 5 years. So what I'm trying to say is, when you build a program for the future workforce, you think ahead. You might need not just one field, you might need to mix all fields together. And the second thing is, people sitting here know a lot about electricity. We know this market. But the people outside of this field, we know very little, how little they know about field. So that's one thing. And considering about the market, the United States have vertically integrated restructured market. And there's not just one restructured market. There's an energy market, there's capacity market. Most people get lost already. So one thing I want to mention is the EEI has a transmission school. It will teach you, first thing, like, understand the physics of the grid. And the second thing is a rate school. How we make money and how we allocate the cost. So that's tied to affordability. And then, after these two things, then you finally can say, okay, I understand the system. So we need universities and we need state and federal help us to build a clear program for people outside of this field. And the third thing I want to bring here is what's the future of this field, right? When we're thinking about demand growth from AI, we feel like, well, 150 gigawatt firm power, that's a lot for the next 5 years. I think it'll be more. Why? We should compare us with cellular data consumption. So if you're thinking like 15 years ago, the whole United States only needed like 3.5 billion megabytes. That's what they use, the units, right? And then people just use a little bit on their phone. It's like, these things are so expensive. How do I need it? And what's the number today? 74 trillion. It's like, the growth is incredible. I'm not getting that on my phone, on my watch. I get that from my dog on the collar. I want to use that everywhere. So the electricity is the same thing. When I got a ChatGPT, every day I use it. I ask them, should I wear this pair of shoes? Should I wear this kind of jacket? I ask everything about ChatGPT. I feel like everybody can afford a secretary right now. you know. And then also, like when I travel, I take an Uber or Lyft. I always get scared. As a business woman, you go to a different city at nighttime, and then the driver trying to hand you a name card, you feel scared, right? And then try to windmill. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. The windmill parking in front of you, they have your name on the top, you get in, and you turn the music you like, left and right. There's more people will try these things, and the windmill is coming to DC next year. So what's that mean? The consumption will be high. And right now, when we have a wind technician troubleshooting a turbine, it's no longer 2 anymore, it's 1. What they do is they gear themselves with cameras everywhere. And then when you think about solar panel, there's very little moving parts. So you're going to have more robots probably going to do the maintenance than you are. And there will be more UAVs to examine your power line than technicians. So we need new jobs, like people can maintain those equipment, understand the equipment, the training of the equipment. Everybody can become AI trainer. So I'm going to stop here.
Thank you. Pivoting over to leadership of the folks that are actually already in the system. To Taisha, how much leadership development involved to support the energy transformation?
Hi everyone. Hope I don't look too disheveled. I just came from Baltimore. So I don't have to talk to you theoretically. I can talk to you about what I see in our company as we position to do so. I just left a session where leaders from all over this organization were trying to solve and think through some of the complexities of some of the large load that we're talking about in this very room. I was there from 10 to 3, and then Ann and I got on train, planes, and automobiles to be here on time. So I don't have to tell you, and I'm new here. I've been here for 8 weeks tomorrow. So I'm leveraging all the new things in order to give you a real answer. Leaders have to think, wait for it, differently. We have to be able to pivot and adapt. I watched people in the room today challenge assumptions and say, I know this is what you think, but what about the information we don't have yet? And really push through to think through thoughtful results and not have to have the full picture. But based on the information we have right now, here's how we're going to position ourselves to compete in the market. We're not going to let Google outdo us. We're not going to let them move faster than us. Instead, we're going to think smarter. Leadership, we're going to have to move from just job descriptions to skill sets, right? Cross-functional, where people can do more than just one thing. We're going to have to look at the market differently. We're going to have to look at reskilling. AI is just about smarter than us. We should be leveraging it. I don't typically write emails without it. Why would I sit and think through words when I can go over to our approved Microsoft Pilot and say, here's my audience, here's what I need to say, go ahead and wrap this for me. Leaders, we have to get out of our own way, and we have to open to the new ways of working. We also need to move from this place of pipeline and what we've known it to be to ecosystems. I'm talking about what I see right here when we're leveraging universities and we're leveraging internships and returnships, and even some of the work we're doing now where we are responding in time to displaced federal workers. And my team is out and we are recruiting and we're passing resumes and we're doing headshots because we don't have all the answers, but as leaders we need to reimagine what the future of talent looks like.
Thanks so much. Based on this, with Jim, would the energy industry shift to accommodate the significant need for capacity supporting these technologies, such as AI, as we mentioned several times, what do you foresee as the most immediate workforce development needs?
Well, as you've just heard, digital upskilling and artificial intelligence upskilling is going to be common in perhaps every industry. And I'm hopeful that it is, because then it reduces the burden on any one industry, of course. Understanding algorithmic thinking needs to begin usually around 3rd grade. We teach algorithmic thinking to 3rd graders in my university lab when they come for half-day visits with us. We don't have them programming in C languages that involve semicolons and things like that, but we do that with 4th graders. And starting them early means maybe a shallower on-ramp later in life. But there are a lot of people in the industry with great potential to contribute for decades who will need that kind of upskilling now. Now, industry credentialing could be a very important impact, or have a very important impact on this by just giving these metrics by which individuals can measure their progress and make themselves employable for the rest of their career within the same industry. That involves a collaboration between educators and industry that can happen at every level. So typically with credentialing, that can begin in high school, and it's certainly prominent in post-secondary education at the community college level. And increasingly, universities are responding to this, you might call it a tool belt initiative, recognizing that increasingly people are finding these hands-on technical skills jobs to be more appealing than sitting in an office, or worse, sitting at home staring at a screen for most of the day. Taking advantage of that, providing credentials and pathways that take students at all ages from one level to the next, but with that comes opportunities for career advancement, maybe starting your own business. All sorts of great things can happen. So, from an industry perspective, I'd like to imagine that every company represented here is part of a local association or affiliation that ensures that the energy industry is represented on every single school division's career, technical, and adult ed advisory board. These are required by the Perkins Act to exist in every school division. I've been on one since 2007 in Arlington. I chair it now, and I also chair the Alexandria City Career Technical and Adult Ed Advisory Committee. You can only chair for 1 year, so we all shuffle around and recruit people all the time. Believe me, they are thirsty for your involvement. We are struggling to get students to enroll in our 10, now 11 energy courses in Virginia. We're struggling to get teachers willing to teach them. By having representation of the industry on these committees, promoting to school boards the importance of these skills, we're going to transform education. Otherwise, they listen to parents who are concerned about all sorts of smart things and reasonable things, but they're not future-oriented. They are concerned about the immediacy of their families, and a lot of important trends are overlooked as a result.
Thank you. Just a little anecdote about myself. I'm actually married to someone in craft labor. He was an electric lineman. He's in the trade now. He's in construction management at a utility in Southern California. But just based on that and the transition to this new renewable infrastructure, I know for him, moving from the trade to the office was a leap and a jump. And so for me, recognizing how much more it would be for someone in craft labor going into the office with this renewable transmission. My next question is for Hoy. What challenges will the current labor workforce face when transitioning from fossil fuel-based technologies to renewable energy?
Okay, so I think the number one thing is that, lots of our members, when they retire fossil generation, they actually retain their workforce and move them to the renewable generations, because those are good workers. And they have a very good attitude. They treat their equipment like a baby to solve their problems. The number one difference is when you have one AP1 installed with 1 gigawatt of nuclear generation, right? It's one generator and it's massive, but that's equivalent to probably you need to have like a 500 3 megawatt wind turbines, consider the cost factor. 500, you have 500 generators located everywhere. That's a lot of equipment, right? So that's number one difference. And then number two is these renewables, they're more like, to me, it's like a smartphone. They have, maybe the same thing you have compared to a telephone. You all have a charger. And the rest is more parts. There's lots of moving parts, lots of electronics. and lots of sensors. So to them, there's lots of, a new digital equipment, and then they're tied to more failures, and then also tied to more troubleshooting steps. So that's very different. And then over time, like many operators bring in AI to help you to speed up the troubleshooting. So one thing, let's thinking if 500 wind turbines and 1 or 2 shut down, then which one you're going to bring in first, right? So it's all become like an AI data-driven, and then technicians also equipped with these tools to solve the problem. So I guess number one thing, we have to make sure we train them with this domain knowledge. And then number two is make sure continue education. The iteration of new equipment is so fast. And wind turbine, when I just started my work, it's 1.5 megawatt each one. And then now they have elevators inside, it's 5 megawatt. And the components, from the fiberglass to carbon fiber, it's all changing. It's changing so fast, just like your iPhone. And then for solar panels, that changes even faster. And then, right now, notice, maintenance is so expensive, you better just replace the entire array. So given all of these iteration of technologies, I guess it's very challenging to maintain the knowledge level for workforce.
Based on that, specific to Exelon, I wanted to ask, what critical skill sets will be essential for Exelon's workforce to thrive in the future power market?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about it, right? But the digital fluency that we've talked about over and over, the skills and data analysis, right? AI, not being afraid of it, embracing it, reimagining how we do our work. Also, systems thinking, the interconnectedness between energy systems, markets, and policy. We can't be good at one. We have to be good at all, and raising leaders that are actually able to understand the landscape and change with the times. Knowing when we need to have, multiple touch points, one touch point, but what does that look like over and over again, even as administrations change. I might also say that agility and adaptability we've been talking about, the ability to pivot quickly and respond to changes, that's going to be extremely important. And then also the sustainability for literacy, and understanding that we need to consistently reskill. The information that we had yesterday is old now. And AI is beating us at all of it, right? And so making sure that we are not just putting people in the classroom and marking a checkbox that they've been trained, but instead giving them real-time, scenario-based learnings, whether it be virtual and augmented reality, right? Our kids are sitting on PlayStations and all of the sorts, and they're going into these different worlds that are giving them a reality they can compete in. We better get with the times as it relates to the critical skills our current population needs. Yeah.
I have one.
It's really important. Being customer-centric. Making sure that whatever we're building, however we're thinking, at the heart of it is our customer and the power of the communities in which we serve. Because we can build the data centers and all the things, but our customers are looking at affordability. So when we begin to build and think with them in mind, we're also going to not only create workers that can build, but also educate and be able to really advocate for the changes and how we're going to have long-term sustainability as a result of them.
Thank you so much. So for Jim and for Hoy, just based on your experience and your background, what key challenges and opportunities do you see in aligning workforce development with the rapid transformation of the energy industry?
I think there's going to be a great need for, at the fundamental level, an understanding of mechanical and electrical engineering, at least in high school. Most of you probably know that most every high school has 2 engineering teachers in the U.S. public schools. And every middle school has at least 1 engineering teacher. But our students can't access them if they're taking music and a world language, both of which are graduation requirements. So that means many of our students don't even get access to these courses until 11th grade. So they're missing out on some of those fundamentals that might drive expanded interest. We're also going to need them to understand, as my colleague said, systems thinking, especially in the context of renewables and how renewable systems actually operate grid. Energy storage is going to be a big one, as will grid flexibility. But on top of all of those, these, what you might call STEM habits of mind, they are skills and dispositions that are important for adaptation, flexibility, and the willingness to learn new things and take on new challenges. All of those are going to be really critical and predispose somebody to lifelong learning, which will be another important component to people elevating themselves throughout their career within the same industry.
No worry. I have two inputs. So first one, we have to admit we have a very aging grid infrastructure in the United States. So it's very aging, and we also want to, not to do this clean energy transition, but we also want to have more distributed generation. So when you have more rooftop solar, more battery connected to the system, your system was not designed that way. It was designed to have like a 10 giant bigger power plant and move from A to B consistently. It was not designed to have like 1,000 data points connected to bling, bling, bling every second. So to solve this problem, I think it requires intrastate planning, right? We're always talking about, oh, SPP is talking to MISO, talking to what? But we never hear labor development crossing state talk to each other. So I met at a community college in Iowa. They're very proud that, wow, we have 60% of power generated from wind. So we have this program across all of our community college. We train them, we deploy them with utility, everyone loves them. But then it's not just Iowa, all the way from the Midwest down to Texas, you all need this kind of skilled workers. And in Texas, they have a big problem because they're an oil gas company. People, they offer more, so you see like technician working here 1 year, then jump the other place another year. So we need like these states talk to each other. So you can have like a collaborative effort to make sure the workforce will grow and flow in those regions, similar to your transmission system. And then another thing I want to bring here is in the United States, because we don't have manufacturing for years, and we have a clear gap between engineer and technician. So all of my classmates graduated, maybe we're doing engineer, like we do design, troubleshooting in the office, and we'll say, oh, technician will get these things done. And technicians feel like, well, you don't know how to put hands on things, so why you tell me do this, do that? And maybe I just become like a car repair shop, and just replace this or do that. So this gap needs to be shrunk, especially with now we see more and more manufacturing in the US. And some of the things we see like solar panel, module, battery. And today's manufacturing facility, they're so advanced. And that's a clearly joint efforts between technician and engineer. So we need to really shrink this gap to adapt to the future. If we have to make sure the engineer can put a hands-on, understand the equipment, and the technician can share their feedback with engineer willing to hear from them, right? Not like it's, you don't know the design. So I think when we're shrinking this gap, if we do Six Sigma, you will know how much money we can save for the company.
I know you guys have been talking about the challenges and opportunities. One of the things that I would like to know is how can we ensure equitable job opportunities and workforce development during this transition on top of just the challenges and opportunities?
So diversity is a big word, and it's a difficult word in the last 4 months or so, but if you think of it as diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of exposures, you recognize the advantages of diversity in everything that we do. One of the things I do with the high school and undergraduate interns who are at my campus right now, well, maybe they're probably home by now, but they come from 19 different high schools and 3 different countries, and they spend time just learning about what each other has done and what each other has explored in their past and the kinds of courses they've taken. They discover more commonality than differences. Commonalities are in motivations and curiosity, and the differences are in exposures and experiences, and they're mutually fascinated. That is one of the greatest things that happens in education which we've all recognized historically as a great equalizer. I think that career exposure in the earliest grades is probably one of the most important things in creating pathways for diverse thinkers and what you might even call non-traditional learners. Young women in engineering programs, for example, are only now kind of crossing that line and saying, well, we're no longer non-traditional learners in engineering. There are plenty of us. And they're celebrated in the schools. Maybe you can do an experiment at home, but most students who are in middle school know only about their parents' careers, their friends' parents' careers, and their parents' friends' careers, and the professionals in their everyday existence, like teachers and dentists, and doctors, and safety officers. Ask the young people in your lives what they know about your career, and take the time to talk to them about your work day. When you encounter a young person in the evening, how was your day at school? They're just going to say fine. But if you instead start telling a story about your day, something that disappointed you or frustrated you, or made you happy or made you surprised, pretty soon, especially if they're 9th or 10th grade, they'll start competing with you for storytelling. And that is a really great way to just engage them, start introducing them to these important things that will make them ready for the kinds of opportunities that exist in all of these companies represented here.
For Hawaii, with your member companies, as part of EEI, same question, how do you ensure the equitable opportunities?
So I think number one is the transparency. So you need to offer this platform for diverse people with diverse background to grow, so they know what's the measurement system. So for example, I would say my past experience. We have this called a Shark Tank competition. You have an idea, that's your only opportunity to stand in front of your CEO, share your idea, how can you improve the system for your company. I mean, that's my first time, standing in front of my CEO to share my idea, and he listened. And he said, here's $5,000, go make it happen. So, I mean, you're still full-time employee, you got paid the same, I just got $5,000 more work, right? We're just so proud. So I think a transparency, a clear path for your employee, that's number one, very important. And number two, go back to what you're talking, education. My kids probably hear too much from me. So. And then, women in nuclear, they make this really cool story, how nuclear generates power. It's a cartoon book, so kids can see it. And then, to most kids, they hear the word nuclear, don't even know what's nuclear. So they see that book, at a young age, they can see, oh wow, that's amazing. So I think all these associations, even EEI has a Center of Energy Workforce Development Group that have 140 members inside. So they should have some early reading books for the next generation. Because when they see that, they know that at a young age, and they can use their imagination to really grow differently in the future. I guess lastly is just bring the competitiveness. It sounds like crazy. It's like, while you're regulated, why do you think about competitiveness? I think the competitiveness is really making this sector continue to grow. Thinking investor-owned utilities, actually a very challenging business. So your investor wants you to have a return. If you have no return, you don't get money. And this is a very capital-heavy industry. Every year, our members invest more than $200 billion on new projects. So that's very hard. And what did I say? I forgot what I said. So yeah, I guess just okay. So you got lots of capital. This is a very tough sector. I think I just stand for a second. Yeah, I guess just transparency, education, and bring everything together.
I can build on that. Many months ago, Jenny and I started brainstorming some of this career awareness challenge, and I engaged 8 of my Masters of Engineering graduate students who are computer science majors technically. And they actually built a chatbot that interacts with the ONET database by the Bureau of Labor Statistics specific to energy. And it's designed so that you can just start having a conversation about kinds of work you want to do. And we were joking earlier about so many young people tell me they want to work outside. And I nod, and I did too. And I was actually a fish biologist in my first career. But once you hit 40, working outside isn't so cool anymore after, multiple cold November rains and things like that. But this awareness evolves in a natural conversation that these students have with this AI-driven chatbot based on data that was developed. If you don't know the ONET database by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they interview a minimum of 1,000 people with every job title. And these are established job titles with SOC codes. And they build this amazing data set. You can get to it at onetonline.org and put your own title in there, and you'll be really impressed with what you see. I think this is just one of many tools the industry can use to demystify all that you know that the general public does not.
Yeah, I'd actually like to weigh in on that for a second. And what I can do is speak from my own experience. I'm newer here, right? And so as a woman, a black woman, if you can't tell, with extensive experience in nuclear, I used to create talent strategy for our country's power plants and go back and forth and create standardization. And then I had a stint in transportation, and then after that, consulting. I didn't have to work. I got to interview Exelon as Exelon was interviewing me. So when we talk about equity, we're also talking about retention and attraction, that they go hand in hand. And what brought me here and what allowed me to make this as a choice was I saw representation. I saw people in higher leadership who looked like the communities that they actually serve. And then when I took another peek, I was able to see affinity groups like the one that we're able to sit here in today, that other companies have kind of rolled back, and to see leaders that were standing behind the fact that diversity actually does make us better and make us more competitive. And so I wanted to speak to those because I'd love for us to talk theoretically and what we need to do, but I also want us to take a good look at what we are doing and be able to extend those really good practices as well.
And that was a great segue to the next question for Hoy, especially with your member companies and then with Taisha. What are the other things? I know you mentioned just diversity and seeing yourself in your leadership, but what are the other things the energy sector can do to attract and retain talent among younger generations?
So me again? Okay. Well, this is actually something I learned yesterday. There's lots of young generation. They want to work for renewable because here the word is clean. I don't want to work for gas and coal because they're dirty. So I think that there's a misconception, right? But it's in their brain. So I had to tell them, say, you know what? For a gearbox, your lubrication system is from Shell, from BP. So I think, the image for utility sector, I think we really need to build the image like we're the backbone of the U.S. economy. So how we market ourselves so we can track more young generations. One thing I learned from Jensen Wong, he showed up in EEI's 2024 last year. He said traditionally when you produce a product, you need material and energy. But nowadays, you only need energy, then you produce a product. So we are the energy. So I think we really need to market our sector as the cool sector. And the second thing I learned, this is very interesting, it's called the leadership communication, talking about younger generation more care about it's called emotional health, mental health. Can you have a working environment and make them trust you and make them feel safe? Because otherwise they would just feel like, well, why should I go to office, 5 days per week? I can just do an Uber driver. I can just get a coding project. I make enough. I can enjoy my life the rest of the time. So we have to make sure they feel safe and their thoughts got heard. For a great leader, I think you are a great facilitator. You have to listen. When I was just become manager, I remember I made lots of early mistakes. When people started to talk, I immediately wear my SME hat. I know you're wrong, you're really wrong. I want to correct you, but we have to pull back. We have to listen, maybe it's nonsense, but actually there is some thoughts, something will inspire us, so we can help them to grow, and they also help us to grow.
I can't agree more with Hoi, so I will not repeat her because I had very similar answers with the purpose-driven branding, right? Our commitment to climate and making sure that we're able to be forward moving. But one thing that I definitely want to talk about for younger generations is moving from compliance to culture and making sure that we are respecting the full layer of people they are. As a matter of fact, right now, we are in the debrief of engagement surveys where we didn't just pulse our management population, but also our unionized population as well, making sure that we understand how employees feel, what's important to them, being able to take a good look in the mirror and say, we don't have it right, we might have missed that. How do we bridge the gap, right? So I think also making sure that we don't just tell people they can bring their whole selves to work, and they can be expressive, but actually listening to the inputs and moving from this compliance where we're all kind of one type of person in this homogeneous space, but really allowing people to be the difference that they are, which is ultimately making us competitive. So listening to their stories, doing something about it when they raise concerns as well.
So this is a bit anecdotal, but I do teach in the College of Natural Resources in the Center for Leadership and Global Sustainability Graduate School at Virginia Tech. My students range from 22 up to their early 60s. And the young students are entirely unaware of the natural resources and environmental jobs in your companies. The older students are trying to get those jobs. They've worked in those companies, and now they want to be qualified to get them because they're rewarding, they get to represent their company, create the best image for their company, recommend the best practices available to them, and be heroes in communities rather than something very different.
Thank you. I appreciate all your responses, especially when Jim and Taisha said, I personally am environmental within Quantum Services, but also I came from San Diego Gas and Electric, so thank you for that. I think we might have time for one question. No? Okay, we don't have time for any questions. Sorry. So if you guys can thank our panelists.
I'm going to be quick. The food is ready. Serve yourself. Second, I want to thank PEPCO and ARG to put this together. We started the conversation back in February, and it's a long way, and we put a lot of effort to put this event together, and I think that actually it went well. So thank you all for attending. Thank you all for making this happen, and enjoy the food and networking. Thank you.